All right. So again, the whole point of this watercolor techniques activity is for you to be able to have some fun with your watercolors, to explore what marks your brushes can make, and to explore what kind of effects you can create using your watercolor set and, of course, some water. You want to have some paper towel nearby as well, not only for blotting when you're rinsing your brush in between, and of course if you've got too much water on the surface, sometimes you can pick it up with your brush and blot it off. Sometimes you want to create a cloud effect where you've got your paint on your paper and you want to kind of lift it at times, right, to create different textures as well. So make sure you have some paper towel nearby, okay? We worked on this yesterday. We're going to redo it today, going through the steps a bit slower. So I will take you through that, starting with a fresh piece of paper. All right. And as we discussed yesterday, sometimes when you're working with watercolor, you're adding quite a bit of water to your paper. And when it's heavily absorbent of water, you find that it buckles and bends a little bit. So a good way to control the paper and to ensure it dries straight is to tape it down. Okay, so I've just got some plain old masking tape here. Painter's tape works as well. And let me just... It's hard for you to see the entire paper, but it's here on my desk, okay? So I'm just kind of covering the watercolor paper with half the width of my tape. Painter's tape is good, right, because it doesn't tend to peel the paper. Sometimes masking tape sticks to the paper and it sometimes tears the paper. So when you're removing it, you have to be really careful. Sometimes I like to hold my finger here on the edge, especially if it's still a bit damp, and then to carefully roll it off. If you don't have tape, it's not the end of the world. You can still complete all of the activities without the tape. You'll just find that sometimes your paper buckles a bit, but you can easily just stick it under a few heavy books when it's dry and iron it back down. Okay, so the next thing that we want to do is we want to divide our paper into 8 equal sections, and working with the measurements of the paper, we found that we could break it down into specific measurements. Okay, so this is a 9 by 12 sheet of paper. If you measure it in centimeters, it turns out to be just about 23 centimeters across. I like to do my measurements using centimeters just to stick to the metric system. It's a bit easier. Okay, so we divide 23.5. We're looking at about 11.5 as our center point. So I like to mark 11.5 towards the top and towards the bottom. Okay, and then that way you can just line up your ruler at the center and divide the sheet in perfect half. Okay, then you want to divide it into 4 equal sections from the top to bottom, and I found that about 7.5 centimeters gives you 4 equal sections. So I'm going to go from the top, and every 7.5. Just give it a little bit of a mark, and I'll do the same thing on the other side. All right, and then we'll split it up. All right, so this is Watercolor Techniques. I'm just going to give it a little bit of a title at the top, because this is something that you're going to look back at while you're working on your painting. It's kind of like a little cheat sheet of effects, okay? So Watercolor Techniques, the first one here is going to be a flat wash. Okay, so we'll call this one a flat wash. The one below it is going to be tonal values. All right, the one below it will be wet paint on a wet surface. So wet on wet. The one below it will be dry paint on a wet surface. Dry on wet. Okay, so from the top we have flat wash, then tonal values, then wet on wet, and dry on wet. And on the other side, we'll have gradated wash, okay, and then stippling, then wet on dry, and last but not least, dry paint on a dry surface. Dry on dry. Okay, so again, from the top on this side, we have a gradated wash, stippling, wet on dry, and dry on dry.